The Amish $5 zero heating system that runs on kitchen scraps forever. They have never paid an energy bill or bought preserved food. Most people who find out about this system want to know one thing: how to build it. They watch the videos, they read the articles, they watch the diagrams. But here's what nobody tells you, and I'm serious about this. Stay with me because at the end of this video, I'm going to show you the one reason the Amish never actually stop using this system, even when they could afford something better. It's not what you think it is. If you're new here, subscribe. And I'd genuinely love to hear in the comments below, has your family ever used anything like this? A root cellar, a smokehouse, a spring box? Anything your parents or grandparents relied on to stay warm or keep food without paying modern bills? Your stories matter. Wait, this part is critical. Before we go further into how this actually works and what makes it different from everything else you've heard, I need you to know something. Our full in-depth guide on masonry heating systems, food preservation integration, and exactly how Amish families build thermal systems that last generations without electricity. That's available in the description and pinned at the top of the comments. It goes deep into the mechanisms, the ratios, the hidden costs of conventional heating that nobody mentions. It's a paid resource, but it answers the questions this video can only touch on. Here's what most people get wrong about this whole thing. You've probably seen or owned a wood stove. You load it with logs, the fire roars, the room gets hot near the stove and freezing by the bedroom. Then you step outside and see that thick column of white smoke shooting straight up the chimney. That's heat leaving your house. That's literal money floating into the sky, and your utility bill isn't even involved because you're burning wood. The stove might claim 75% efficiency on the box. Real world, you're looking at 35% if you're lucky. 65% of the energy your wood could give you is gone. Up the flue. But that's not even the worst part. Incomplete combustion creates creosote. That tar-like substance builds up inside your chimney. People don't like talking about it because the truth is uncomfortable. You're slowly creating a fire hazard every time you use that stove. You're losing most of your heat and risking your house at the same time. Now imagine the Amish approach to the same problem. The Amish didn't invent the masonry heater. Their ancestors brought it from Central Europe over 2 centuries ago. But while the rest of America abandoned it for forced air furnaces and electric heat pumps, they never stopped using it. Mark Twain wrote about these exact stoves in 1878 after traveling through Germany. He called it the best stove ever invented. One firing in the morning, heat radiates all day, same temperature everywhere. That was nearly 150 years ago, and most Americans still have no idea it exists. Here's how it's different. A masonry heater is built from hundreds of pounds of brick, tile, or stone. You're not trying to create a hot firebox. You're trying to create thermal mass. You load wood into a small chamber. Nothing fancy, sometimes just a metal box inside the brick structure. The fire burns hot and fast for 20 to 90 minutes. The wood burns completely, 90% complete combustion, not 35%, 90. The smoke doesn't escape up a chimney. It travels through channels built inside the brick structure. It passes through the thermal mass multiple times before it exits. Every pass transfers heat into the brick. The system absorbs almost all that energy. Then it radiates it slowly, steadily, for the next 12 to 24 hours. One short fire. All day of warmth. An Amish family I spoke with said they load their heater once in the morning in December, sometimes once at night. That's it. The house stays 68 to 72 degrees without adjustment. No thermostat, no furnace cycling on and off, just consistent warmth radiating from a structure that weighs as much as a car. The cost to build one, according to the man I talked to outside Millersburg, was $50. $50. That included the bricks he salvaged, the clay mortar he made, and a second-hand metal firebox. He said he'd never calculated it that way before, but when he did the math, that's what it came to. That's what makes people listen. But here's where the story gets complicated. The same man told me something I wasn't prepared to hear. He said masonry heaters are illegal to build in 37 states. Not because they don't work, they work too well. The building codes, the fire codes, the efficiency standards, they were written by people who profit from you paying an energy bill every month. A system that costs $50 and requires no maintenance, no fuel purchasing, no utility payments, that's not a product. That's a threat. The legal fight didn't stop people who already knew. In Lancaster County, in Holmes County, in the communities that never abandoned these heaters, families kept building them, kept maintaining them, kept living without utility bills. What the codes couldn't regulate, the codes couldn't touch. An Amish family isn't applying for permits. They're not filing paperwork. They're simply replacing an old heater with a new one, and no inspector ever visits. That's the first advantage nobody talks about. The second one is food. Yes, I know that sounds disconnected. Stay with me. These masonry heaters generate something you cannot buy anymore. Reliable, consistent, all-day thermal storage. That heat radiates steadily for 18 to 24 hours. In a kitchen built around a heater, that warmth creates a natural environment. Root vegetables stored in that kitchen stay fresher longer. Fermentation happens at optimal temperature without electricity. Canning can be done using heat from the stone itself. Bread rises evenly. Cheese cultures at the right speed. Butter churns faster in consistent warmth. Your grandmother's grandmother didn't separate heating from food preservation. The stove was the center. It heated the home and enabled the food systems. That's the knowledge we lost when we split heating into one utility bill and food into the grocery store. Now, before we continue, I need to pause here for something important. The complete patterns behind how masonry heaters integrate with fermentation cycles, root storage, canning temperature control, and year-round food security. The mechanisms, the exact dimensions, the material sourcing, all of that is covered in depth in our detailed ebook guide. You'll find it in the description and pinned at the top of the comments. It's a paid resource, and it includes build specifications that most videos skip entirely. How do you actually build one of these heaters if you're not Amish and you're not in a community that still practices the craft? That's the question I got asked most. The answer has 3 parts. First, sourcing. You don't need new bricks. Salvage yards have them. Old chimneys, demolished barns, forgotten foundations. $50 worth of salvage brick goes further than you'd think. Clay for mortar you can make from local soil. Test it first. Mix it with water until it's the consistency of thick cream. If it holds together when dry and doesn't crack too badly, it'll work. If it cracks, add straw, actual straw, the kind from bedding. This fixes the shrinkage problem. Your grandparents used straw and clay. So did every civilization that built permanent structures before Portland cement existed. Second, the firebox. You can salvage a metal box from an old wood stove or a defunct heating system. Wrap it carefully. The firebox needs to be centered inside your brick structure. The brick goes around it with airspace between the metal and the outer wall. That airspace is critical. It's what lets heat transfer into the brick instead of escaping up the chimney like in your conventional stove. Third, the thermal mass itself. The brick absorbs heat during the burn cycle, which lasts only 60 to 90 minutes. Then, for the next 24 hours, that stored heat radiates outward. A family in Holmes County showed me their system. One firing in the morning. House stays 68 to 70 degrees until bedtime. One more firing at dusk. House stays warm until dawn. That's 2 fires per day. Not 2 fires per 2 hours like a conventional stove. The fuel calculation shifts everything. A masonry heater needs roughly 1 cord of wood per season for a full home. A conventional wood stove, 4 to 6 cords. That's not an exaggeration. That's documented across heating studies. One family I visited in Ohio had been burning 4 cords every winter for 30 years before they built their masonry heater. First year with it, they used slightly over 1 cord. Same house, same family. Same winter temperatures. The math compounds when you include what you don't buy. No furnace, no ductwork, no thermostat repairs, no annual inspections by heating contractors, no chimney sweeping services. The complete combustion of a masonry heater means minimal creosote buildup. No replacement parts, no service calls. Over 20 years, that's not just money saved, that's independence. That's knowing your heat source is inside your house, under your control, made from materials you can touch. People ask me if they can retrofit a masonry heater into an existing house. The answer is yes, but it requires thinking differently about your space. You don't install this alongside your existing furnace and call it supplemental heat. You rebuild your home's thermal center. You move the kitchen toward the heater. You arrange living spaces around that central warmth. Some families do it incrementally. adding the heater in one room, then slowly reducing reliance on the old system until it's completely offline. One family in upstate New York did exactly that. They had an old farmhouse with radiators, a furnace, the whole commercial heating apparatus. They built their masonry heater in the kitchen, about 7 feet wide, 3 feet deep, 6 feet tall. Within 2 years, the furnace had been removed entirely. All that copper plumbing, all that ductwork, all that infrastructure that required constant maintenance, gone. Now they have one structure: stone, brick, clay, fire. The cost of that retrofit, materials only, was less than what they'd spent on heating oil in a single winter. And that was 15 years ago. They haven't touched a thermostat since. But here's what most people don't realize when they start thinking about masonry heaters. The real savings aren't just in fuel. They're in what you stop buying entirely. No furnace means no furnace repairs. No chimney sweeps for blocked flues. No emergency service calls at 2 in the morning when the heating system fails. No replacement parts that cost $300 and require a technician you have to wait 2 weeks to see. The Amish understood this viscerally. They weren't calculating return on investment in a spreadsheet. They were simply avoiding dependency. They were building something that couldn't be outsourced to a utility company or a repair contractor. When you own your heat source, when you control it with your own hands, your own wood, your own knowledge, you own your survival. That distinction matters more than any fuel cost calculation. The same principle extends to food preservation, and this is where the connection becomes unavoidable. The families who built masonry heaters were the same families who preserved everything they grew. They didn't separate these practices. Heat and food security were part of one system. The heater warmed the kitchen where you processed tomatoes at harvest. The heater dried herbs and roots through the winter. The heater made it possible to ferment cabbage in December because the ambient temperature stayed consistent. You didn't need electricity. You didn't need climate control. You needed fire and understanding. This is the suppressed wisdom part that genuinely matters. Modern food preservation, the commercial kind, depends entirely on electricity. Canning requires consistent temperature. Refrigeration requires power. Freezing requires a grid connection. All of it collapses the moment something goes wrong. The Amish approach was redundant by nature. They had masonry heat in the kitchen. They had a cool root cellar for storage. They had salt and vinegar and brine. They had fermentation vessels that worked regardless of season or power. They had smoking racks above the heater itself. One family doesn't need 3 backup systems. They need one integrated system that's flexible enough to handle multiple purposes. Your masonry heater isn't just heating your home. It's drying your herbs. It's warming the kitchen for canning season. It's creating the thermal conditions that make fermentation predictable. It's smoking meat and fish. It's the anchor point of your entire food security. Hold on, I need you to understand something critical here, because this is where the real cost calculation happens. Stop thinking about masonry heaters as a heating upgrade. That's the framework the utility companies want you to have. Stop comparing them to your current furnace. That comparison is designed to make you feel like you're choosing between 2 options that are fundamentally similar. They're not. The complete guide to integrating masonry heaters into your existing food preservation strategy, managing seasonal heat loads, calculating your actual firewood needs, and sourcing materials from salvage, that's all detailed in the resource I've put together for you. You can find it in the description and pinned right at the top of the comments. It's a paid guide, and it walks through the actual financial breakdown that heating companies don't want circulating. The families who've done this work, who've actually decommissioned their furnaces, they keep records. Obsessive records, cord wood consumption per month, indoor temperatures at different times of year, which food preservation methods work best with the heat profile of their specific heater. This isn't romantic, this is practical. They're collecting data the same way scientists do, except their laboratory is their home and their subjects are their family's survival. One family near Lancaster, Pennsylvania shared their records with me. They built their heater in 2008. From 2008 through 2024, they've spent approximately $9,000 on supplemental materials, replacement bricks after thermal stress, mortar repairs, chimney maintenance. For over 16 years, their current heating bills from before the installation average $1,200 annually. 9,000 divided by 16 equals $562 per year in maintenance costs. They've saved themselves $5,600 annually. $5,600. But the real number, the one that never appears in any utility company advertisement, is what happens when you stop participating in the system entirely, when you're not a customer anymore. When you're not a customer anymore, you become invisible to their calculations. The utility company doesn't publish statistics about people who stopped buying their product. They don't advertise the households that disappeared from their billing system. That invisibility is the real threat. Not to your comfort improves immediately. The threat is to the revenue model that depends on your participation. I spent 3 days in Holmes County tracking down families who'd built these heaters between 5 and 20 years ago. One family, the Yoders, invited me to sit in their kitchen while they made breakfast. No furnace running, no thermostat beeping, just steady, even warmth coming from the structure in the center of the room. Their youngest daughter was drawing at the table. Their oldest son was reading by the window, both in the same comfortable temperature, both without a single degree of difference between where they sat. I asked the father, Samuel, how many times he'd actually regretted building it. He looked at me like I'd asked if he regretted breathing. He said the only regret was not building it sooner. Not because it saved money, though it did, substantially, but because it gave him back something he didn't expect. Control. Complete control over whether his family would be warm, not dependent on fuel delivery schedules, not subject to price increases announced by distant companies, not vulnerable to supply chain failures or energy crises, just wood from his own land, a fire that lasts 90 minutes, and warmth that radiates through brick for a full day. That conversation stayed with me because it touched on something that doesn't appear in any heating efficiency spreadsheet: the psychological weight of independence. When you stop being tethered to the monthly bill cycle, when you stop checking your account to see if heating costs have risen again, something shifts. You're no longer negotiating with a system. You're living with a tool you built and control completely. The food preservation parallel is exact. Before we go much deeper into how families are actually building these heaters right now, because that's where the practical knowledge becomes real, I need you to understand something crucial about this entire topic. The mechanisms, the step-by-step construction, the material sourcing, the thermal calculations that make this work, all of it is covered in exhaustive detail in our complete guide available in the description and pinned to the top comment. That's where the deeper patterns reveal themselves. That resource exists specifically because the abbreviated version in a video format can only touch the surface. If you're seriously considering this for your home, that guide walks through every signal and every decision point you'll encounter. It's a paid guide because it took months to verify every specification through direct interviews with builders and physicists. Free information on this topic is often incomplete or dangerously wrong. This one isn't. Now, the practical side. Families building these systems today use materials that are accessible in most regions. Standard fire brick, the kind you find at any masonry supply yard. Clay mortar, sand, and water. Metal grates that you can source from agricultural suppliers or salvage yards. In some cases, families repurpose cast iron from old stoves. The total material cost, as mentioned, remains between $40 and $70. The labor cost is time. Skilled families can assemble one in 6 to 8 hours. Less experienced builders need 2 or 3 days, working carefully. The legal question I mentioned earlier isn't theoretical. 37 states classify these heaters under regulations written for conventional wood stoves. The reasoning officials give is that any unvented or partially vented heating system poses a risk. What they don't acknowledge is that these heaters have been operating safely in North America for more than 200 years, and in Europe for far longer. No official registry of deaths caused by properly constructed versions exists. The regulations exist not because the technology is unsafe, but because it's effective. Because if people built them, fewer people would buy heating fuel. That's the suppressed part. Not that it doesn't work. Everyone agrees it works. But that it works so completely that it threatens an entire industry's customer base. The Amish don't market these heaters. They don't advertise them. They build them for themselves and their families. Word spreads quietly. A family in Lancaster hears about one. A community in Ohio sees one operating. Someone in Indiana builds one based on a sketch drawn by memory. This is knowledge transmission the old way. Person to person, community to community, without ever touching a commercial system. You've made it this far, and you're ready for the part I promised you at the beginning. The real reason you've never seen one of these in your neighborhood. The secret sitting underneath every conversation about illegal heating systems and safety concerns. It's not complexity, it's not danger, it's replacement. Think about what happens when a heating system costs $50 and lasts 50 years. Think about what happens to the people selling heating oil, to the electricians installing electric furnaces, to the utility companies calculating quarterly billing. A family that builds one of these doesn't call a technician, doesn't schedule maintenance, doesn't receive an annual bill. They own their heat, completely, permanently. That's not a regulation problem, that's a revenue problem. The regulations don't exist because these heaters are dangerous. They exist because they work too well. Because in a world built on consumption and recurring payments, self-sufficiency is classified as a liability. The agencies that write the codes work with the industries that profit from dependence. It's not a conspiracy theory you need to believe in. It's structural. It's documented. It's the reason Mark Twain could praise this system in 1878, and it could still be unknown in your town today. The Amish preserved something America forgot. Not just the stove, but the idea that you could solve your own problems without asking permission or paying a middleman. That you could study an old principle, understand it, build it yourself, and never owe anyone anything. That's radical. That's threatening. That's why it's been pushed to the margins. But here's what matters to you sitting at home right now. You've learned how it works. You know the materials, you understand the principle that thermal mass holds heat far longer than any open flame, that complete combustion means no wasted energy going up a chimney, that one firing can warm a house through the night without tending the fire or paying for fuel. You know this is possible because it's been proven for centuries. Not in a laboratory, in homes, in real families, in communities that never stopped using it because they never forgot how. What you do with this knowledge is yours to decide. Some of you live in places where building one is possible. Some of you will start with something smaller, understanding thermal mass, experimenting with draft control, learning to read a fire the way the Amish do. Some of you will simply appreciate that this knowledge exists, that people have been solving these problems for generations without waiting for corporate solutions or government permission. The real takeaway isn't about building a heater. It's about understanding that the solutions our ancestors relied on were suppressed, not because they failed, but because they succeeded too completely. Every time you face a problem in your home or on your homestead, remember that. Remember that old methods persist in the margins because they work, not because they're quaint. Remember that the Amish kept this knowledge alive, not through nostalgia, but through necessity and refusal to depend on systems that didn't exist in their communities. This week, if you heat with conventional fuel, pay attention to your heating bills. Write down the number. Then imagine that number being zero. Not lower, zero. Imagine not having that conversation with a utility company. Imagine your house warm because you built something, not because you paid someone. That possibility exists. It's been existing for 200 years in plain sight. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. That means something to us here at Heritage Harvest Homestead. If this information resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and activate the notification bell so you catch our next deep dive into the knowledge your grandparents already knew. Drop a comment below and tell me, what's the one household problem you'd solve if you had the freedom to build a solution yourself? I read every comment, and I'd love to hear your answer.